everybody. I'm going to try to film this just to get it so I can give you as much information as possible, and also get it done quickly because I have a lot to do. Okay, so I have all your questions, and first of all, I just want to say thank you sincerely for reading the book, and I'm glad that you're interested in creative nonfiction and that you're working on your craft. I wrote and studied in classes just like yours for 10 years. So I appreciate what you're doing and all the hard work you're putting into this endeavor. So I'm just going to go right into the questions, and I'll just go, I'll say them, and then I'll answer them as best I can. So, and there may be interruptions because my dogs and my kids and my neighbors who we adore are having a birthday party, and so there were just screaming children a minute ago, but we'll do our best. Oh, and you can kind of see that drawing is Bunker sitting on the steps of the Seattle house. That was my wedding gift from Melissa, the Melissa in the book, which is not her real name. And she's in LA, actually. She lives in La Crescenta. Okay, how did you recreate this period in your life with such vivid, minute detail? Did you write from journals, do interviews, reread emails? How much license did you give yourself to recreate and reimagine? I do have a fair amount of journals, and I looked at those, but the way that I started writing the book was by thinking of the moments in my life that I knew that were kind of burned into my memory. You know, we have those moments in life that you remember exactly how the room smelled. You remember everything in that particular moment, or in that particular place. So like my childhood home, you know, I lived there 18 years. I spent a lot of time there. And I remember smells. I remember sounds. I remember the tile, how it felt on my feet. I remember the hardwood floor. I remember the sound of the dog running, you know, down the hall. I remember, you know, my room and my brother's room. I mean, there's a lot of things that I really vividly remember. And one of the things that I found is that when I started writing these stories, you know, just a scene at a time, like, you know, the time my brother pushed me. I remember that day really vividly, and I remember what happened and how we got to that point and where we were in the house. And so from that, you know, because I remember the house so well and because I remember that day so well, I could piece together the details. It is very true that memory is tricky, and, you know, you can remember something one way and another person will remember it another way. That can be really challenging for a memoirist because you start to doubt yourself. And so what I really, because I had those moments too where I'm like, I think this is what I remember, and I think I remember it well, and I think that's what happened, but, you know, there weren't necessarily conflicting reports or conflicting memories from people. But what I went with when I did have those moments was, what is my emotional memory of this moment, of that day? My emotional memory was that I wasn't safe in my house. And that the doctors who put stitches in my head were angelic. I remember being in my dad's car, driving there. And so, you know, I did use journals. I have a bookshelf full here of journals that I did use, but I didn't really rely on them. I wrote down, literally, I probably have it somewhere, like the top 25 scenes that are memories that are burned in my mind. And I'd say I used 10 of them in the book. How much license did you give yourself to recreate and reimagine? Well, I mean, I don't think I recreated in an, like, in a wanting to be imaginative, if you know what I mean. Like I didn't think, well, can't quite remember that, so I guess I'll just make it blue. You know, I didn't do that. But I did decide at some point in this process that I had to trust myself, and I had to trust what I knew and what I remembered. Unless, you know, my own journal or, you know, several people said, no, that's not what happened, then I went with it and I trusted my own memory. And I haven't had anybody come to me and say, I don't remember that happening that way at all. How did you decide to develop so many themes in one narrative? Did you find it difficult to find a balance among so many story threads? It worked beautifully. Well, thank you. I did not decide to do that. That just happened. What I wanted to do was get the story down and get the emotional truth down. Some of the themes, they just sort of appear. Like the whole moon metaphor appeared. I did not intentionally do that. And then what happened was once that appeared, then I was like, okay, I could put it back in here. And that was when I did the amazing work of looking and seeing, well, what was the moon when Bunker was born? And what was the moon the day I left New York? Because I have all those dates, and it was incredible to see the connection between the moon and what was going on. And I still have that in my life now. I still have a wild connection to the moon. Yesterday was a full moon, and I had an amazing day yesterday. Same thing with the last full moon. It's incredible for me. I don't know what it is. But so that metaphor sort of, you know, was born out of this process, and it wasn't something I went in there thinking I want to do that. And I didn't go into it saying I want to have a theme of sibling abuse. I want to have a theme of nature. Those are all just things that are really important to me. You can run the risk of overcomplicating, and when you do have so many different things working in a story. And I'll actually tell you guys a story of when I was working on this book, thinking I'll never publish this anywhere. I went to a very well-known writer's house. She was hosting a event to learn about the publishing industry as a fundraiser, and you know, I spent like $50 and you could go listen to her and get her ear. So I told her about the book, and she said, oh, that's not going to work. You have way too many things going on. And I sheepishly said, okay. And then I left, and I got in the car and I cried, and I drove home, and I called my friend and I said, she said, I don't. And my friend said, don't listen to her. Keep going. Thank goodness, right? All right. Ashley Halloran, my overall Julie oh wait, no, sorry. I skipped Richard. Richard, my question for Julie Barden is, at what point in your life did you feel comfortable writing all this down? 40, 38, 39, 40. I've always been somebody who wants to talk about it, for better or for worse. You know, people who don't like to talk about things don't like hanging out with me because I'll bring it up. And so I think I had to really process a lot of stuff before I could sit down and do this. So I had, you know, a decade of therapy and a decade of thinking, like, what the hell happened? And why am I so wildly in love with and dependent on this dog? And I felt so connected to him that it was a scary, you know, like, when I lose him, I will not be well. After I lost him, this is another story, but after I lost him, the next day I found out that I was a finalist in a fiction writing contest that I'd entered in Glimmer Train. And I hadn't been entering anything or writing anything much. And I thought, oh, that's Bunker. And it felt like he was saying, you know, I died yesterday. You won a writing contest today. Now I want you to tell our story. So I did, but it took me a good long time. He died almost 10 years ago. Ashley, what was it like to write and publish something so deeply personal and oftentimes unflattering about your family? More specifically, how did your family members react to this memoir? Did you share any drafts with them? Talk to them to understand, did any feedback from your family inform your narrative? Um, Part of the process of writing this book was actually confronting my family, talking to my dad, um, talking to my brother. My brother apologized to me for everything before the book was in existence. We were at a restaurant and he's like, I wasn't the best brother and I'm really sorry. And that was great and good. But it was, one moment does not reverse, 20 years of horror, really. And, it was the perfect storm in that he was angry and mean and physical, and I was super duper sensitive and thought a tree in the yard was my grandmother. So how did they react? My parents read it. They read it on a flight. Didn't have a publishing deal. They read it on a flight. They flew out to California to visit me, and they said, we're going to read it on the plane. So they both get off the plane. They get off on baggage claim. They're both like red-eyed and, they don't look good. I'm like, oh shit. Oh, sorry. My dad came up to me and he said, Julie, this is going to be a New York Times bestseller. And I was like, ugh, that's so nice. I was so relieved. It was great. They were like, it was amazing. It was hard for us to read. My dad says he can't listen to the audiobook because the parts with my brother are too painful for him. But they loved it. And it was hard, but they felt good about it. So, and then my brother, I sent the pages in an email to my brother, and he didn't respond for a long time. And then I emailed him again. I said, are you going to read it? And he said, I don't want to read about what a jerk I was as a kid. And I said, that's okay, but I need to know if you're okay with this before I try to publish this book. And didn't hear anything. And then finally I just was like, well, I'm going forward. I haven't heard anything, and figure it out as I go along. And then I got the galleys, and I sent him one. And then he posted on social media a picture of me with Bunker's ashes, and it said, I'm so proud of my sister. The book she wrote is so, so amazing, except I finished it in the airport and I was crying in public. And so I always tell people that there are many ways to apologize to somebody for the way you might have treated them. And I think his biggest sort of apology was saying, yeah, you can tell our story. And he even said, this might help some people. And I think it has. I hope so. Scott, my question is, what did you do to build your platform before finding a publisher? Good question. Don't you hate that whole platform stuff? All that. Oh. Okay, so what I did. So the story behind Dog Medicine's publishing is long. I'll try to keep it short. But I first published this book with a tiny press called Think Peace Publishing, which is based in Minnesota. It's essentially one dude in his apartment. And his story is that he had really, really terrible anxiety to the point where he actually didn't. Hold on, I think my dog wants to come in. Hold on. This is our new foster dog, and she's the ugliest dog you'll ever see. But I love her. But we're a foster fail. This is Holly. Isn't she cute? She's so ugly. She's cute. Okay, sorry. Question was, how did I build my platform? Okay, so I found this publisher. He had really terrible anxiety. He was suicidal, and at the bottom of his sort of, journey, he said to himself, if I get through this, I'm going to do something to help people who struggle from mental illness. And so he started this publishing company, which is a mental health imprint, is what I would always tell people. Super small, had itty bitty distribution. But he said to me, I'll give you 50% royalties. I will be your champion. This will be my full-time job working on your book. We'll do a social media blitz left and right. So I said yes, because I thought, well, I wasn't really in it to have an enormous publisher. I was in it to get the story into the hands of somebody who needed it. And I hoped that this would happen this way. And so we started a dog medicine Facebook page. Facebook sort of ended up being the biggest place for us to do platform. I made a trailer myself with these two hands. I made two trailers, a short one and a long one. And then I did the tour. It's pretty hard to build a platform for a book that doesn't exist yet. So the initial tour really sort of was the place where I started to really push it. I did a lot of social media, mostly Facebook, some Instagram, a tiny bit of Twitter. But that was mainly how I did it. And, you know, I have like a decent, there's like 14,000 people on my Facebook thing, which I don't update often enough. And so that was sort of where that came from. But, you know, that stuff is good once you finish the book. I wouldn't try to build a platform when you're still working on the book. You need to put all your energy into working and making it the best book it possibly can be. The rest will come. Okay, Lindsay, my question is, did you write linearly or did you start writing scenes out of order, timeline-wise, and then put it together at the end? Well, I wrote from I had a piece of paper with memories. It's pretty simple. I had a piece of paper that said Alice the Tree, and it said Fishing with Dad, and it said, you know, Fall on the Floor in New York. It said, you know, I had a lot of scenes in there, you know, breaking up with bad boyfriend, all that stuff. And I would just write those individually. And then I would write, you know, day I got bunker, day my dad made me walk on the driveway, and just write those scenes. And it didn't come together in a way that made a lot of sense for a really long time. I was like, what am I writing? I'm just writing up into the ether, da, da, da. And then I used a book that I actually, where is it? I'm using it again on this next project, but it's an excellent book for structure. Don't do this until, and Allison, you can tell them something else if you have a different opinion. But this is what I did. Once I had all the pages down, I used this book. It's called Writing for Story by John Franklin. It was published initially in the 80s, I think, 1986. And he's a journalist, and he does nonfiction, dramatic nonfiction, long form stories for magazines and stuff. But he has a method of making structure out of nonsense that is really helpful. It's really hard. It's very complicated, and you have to do, like, there's these like complications, sub-complication, and it's hard. I spent 2 days in a hotel by myself, ripping my hair out, staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to figure out how I could fit my story into this kind of structure. It's possible it wouldn't have worked, but it did, I think, I hope. And so I did not write it linearly. I wrote it like a hot mess. It made no sense for a long time. And then when I started to see different motivations and different, you know, dramatic points is when I used this, and it was very helpful. Okay. Sorry. Matthew. I'd like to know how Julie decided to integrate the different timelines into a coherent story. Why not open with Bunker instead of New York? Interested in your organizational process, your weakest skill. Well, I opened up with New York because that was, excuse me, if depression is one of the sort of, you know, there's, if you think about it in terms of Wild, if you guys have all read Wild by Cheryl Strayed, you know, her, what's it called? Her sort of fluid action that holds the whole story together is the Pacific Crest Trail, right? And mine is depression. And so the biggest climax of my depression was the falling down on the floor in New York and just wanting to end my life. So I started with that, and I never deviated from that. I always started with that. But I didn't have the bunker birth chapters in there for a long time. I didn't really have it. The childhood stuff, you know how like the first half of the book is really childhood heavy, and the second half there's none. That was sort of unintentional, but I needed to lay that groundwork so you understood where I was emotionally. I would say go where the emotional resonance is. If you're trying to organize your work, write the scenes that have the most emotional resonance with you, whether it be, you know, the first day something great happened, you know, the day I got bunker, or be the day I collapsed on the floor, or, well, I didn't write the scene where Bunker died until the very end. And actually, if you look on my YouTube profile, there's a video of me actually writing that. I went away again to a hotel and wrote. She wants to be on my lap. Okay, so I would recommend getting this Writing for Storybook if you feel like you have enough pieces down. His name is John Franklin, Jon. If you feel like you have enough pieces down, don't do this until you have everything written, because then it won't be organic. Once you have everything written, you feel like, okay, I've written all the scenes, then this comes in handy, in my opinion. That's what I use this in the probably 3/4 of the way through writing the book. And then I knew what the ending needed to be, and I knew, you know, how I was going to shape that. Okay. What am I working on now? Oh, that's what all the publishers want to know. It's terrible. Literally, the day I got back from my tour, my agent called. She's like, so, what are you working on? I was like, are you kidding me? I'm working on another book that is very hard to explain. And I have sort of made a practice of not explaining it to people. It's a memoir. And it's a different phase of life, and it's not childhood stuff. It's more contemporary. It's very focused on me, less my family. But it's very slow. I'm a very slow writer. I have 2 kids, 2 dogs, a whole boatload of stuff to do, so I'm slow. Okay, how did you decide to seek out a new / bigger publisher for dog medicine? How unusual is this, and what resistance did you face? Well, that's a good one too. Okay, so I did not seek out a bigger, newer publisher. What happened was my friend who was published 2, almost 3 now, novels with Viking read the manuscript and said, I'm going to send this to my agent. And I'd already signed with Think Peace. I said, you can, but I already have this book due. And then I got a phone call about 2 months before the book was supposed to come out. And it was her agent, and she said, I could sell this to a big house, no problem. Is it okay if I try to do that? And I said, well, could it come out half them and half Think Peace? Could it come out at the same date? No. So she said no. And at this point, I was very loyal to Think Peace, and I didn't want to do that. And so I said, no, thank you. And the book came out. It sold out within the first week of it being online. We sold them all, which was amazing. And I did call my mom and say, Mom, did you buy all the books? She said she didn't. And I was in Portland. I had just done a radio show in Portland, and I was coming down the stairs, and I got a phone call during the show, and my phone was on silent, but I saw that I had a message from New York, and I was like, that's weird. And it was the same agent, and she called and said, well, how would you feel if I said I have an offer from Penguin? And I was like, ooh, well. And then I had to call Think Peace and say, I just got this huge offer. what do we do? They wanted the rights to be reverted back to me from Think Peace, which is a really delicate situation, right? I had signed the rights over to him for 5 years, and it was basically, he could have said, no, I'm not, this is my biggest book yet, and I don't want to sell it. But he is a fantastic human being, and he said, this needs to be in more hands, and I don't have the distribution capability yet. Let's do it. So, we negotiated the deal for, how much of the advance he would get, how much royalties he would get versus me. And it was a little hard at times, but it ended up working out well. And we both are happy with how it worked out. I didn't send it out that way. And to back up a little, before I even published it with Think Peace, I sent it out to about 15 agents, which I know is like a drop in the bucket. Everybody says you have to do 100 at least before you start to give up, or at least reconsider. But I found the process so hideous and unpleasant that I was like, I don't want to do this. I mean, I had somebody tell me this would be a really good book if it was about a pit bull, but Goldens are so loving, it's not really much of a story here. I had people tell me I thought it was going to be more about the dog and less about you. I heard a lot of discouraging things at a point where I was not very confident. I think the process of trying to find an agent is really lame. I mean, I guess you got to do it. You got to start somewhere. And then this last question is a very good one to end on. How did you structure your life so you could write? Do you have a set schedule? It is so hard. It's the biggest challenge. I am somebody who likes to binge write. I like to write for like 8 straight hours and just be completely lost in it and be headlong, just can't even deal with the outside world. But I have children, and I have a house, and I have kids, and I have a husband and friends. And so when the kids were born, so I started writing this when my youngest daughter, who's now 9, she was probably 3 or 4 when I really started thinking I was going to write this. And I had to learn how to write in small bursts, which is not fun. But what I learned to do is take, not much time, hour and a half, hour to 2 hours, I would say, on average. Sometimes more, but I often had things I had to get done. I would sit down and say, I'm going to write this one scene today. I'm just going to lose myself in the scene. I'm just going to write as fast as possible, not worry about how it sounds yet, not worry about how it's structured yet. Just write this scene and really try to get back into that moment and what that memory was and what that moment felt like. And then I did that for a couple months, not every day. And I couldn't start till the kids got to school, and I got, walked the dog and did various other things. And there are plenty of days that I don't write. One of the things that woman who was a very well-known author said to me, he made me cry and said my book had too much in it, was she said, do you write every day? It's important that you write every single day. And I was like, yes, I do. And I was totally lying. I don't write every day. But I think about it all the time. And actually, I think that that's part of writing. I call it my percolation phase. Thinking about it all the time. And I have little notes everywhere. And that's a form of writing. Then you have to get your butt in the chair and just do it. If you have a crazy life like mine, I would highly recommend what Cheryl Strayed recommended I do. Because I sat next to her I go to a summer conference for the last 4 summers with her and a couple other writers. And I said, how do you get your work done? And she said, I go to a hotel and I don't leave the hotel room for 48 hours and I write like mad. And I'm exhausted and exhilarated and thrilled at the end. Our kids are almost the same age. That was the best advice I'd gotten, because those were some really important. At the time I figured out the structure with John Franklin's method, was in a hotel. That was a 48-hour stay. It was a marathon. And then I wrote the epilogue in a hotel. And those were really, really important times. I just had to extract myself from my life. I try to, in terms of do you have a set schedule, when I started this new book, excuse me, I actually did, I did like the first week of NaNoWriMo just to get myself in the chair and to keep my numbers going. And that was a really good way to start. Then the election happened and I completely lost it for a little while in terms of set schedule. But it's coming along. It's slow, but it's coming along. So no, I mean, I wish I was like, yes, I wake up every morning and I get my herbal tea and I sit at the desk and I write 10 pages and then I go for a run. Wouldn't that be nice? No, that's not what I do. I write a little bit one day, I don't the next day, I fret about it. But as I get a little older and I get, I feel like the stories that are supposed to be out there in the world, the stories that have a life of their own, that, you happen to be the one who caught that particular idea. If you guys have read Liz Gilbert's Big Magic, she kind of has that in there. There's a lot of ideas. They're looking for homes. And one's gonna land with you. And that's the one that needs to be told. And it's your job to shepherd it into the world. I consider myself just a storyteller. The star of my book is Bunker and kind of Greg to some degree. The family, it's not me. And, there was somebody asked about the unflattering stuff. It's really actually important that you show the unflattering things. That's what people will relate to. When you show yourself in a really vulnerable way, you say, this is how bad it got. Like, this is the thing I was embarrassed to tell people for a long time. That will impact people because they'll go, oh my gosh, me too. That sounds just like me. And you'll realize that I thought I was the only one who felt this way about her dog or who felt this low at certain points in her life. And I'm really not. I'm so not alone. And that was another beautiful side of this. But, if you're writing a book to try to, make everybody see how smart you are and how great you are and how memoir and creative nonfiction, it has to just be honest. Sometimes you might look great. Sometimes you might look like the hero. Sometimes you might look really bad, and you have to be strong enough to put that on the page. Your reader will really appreciate it. I think that might be it, you guys. Will you guys do me a favor? After you watch this, can somebody take a picture of the whole class and then just email it to me so that I can see who I was talking to? It'd be fun. I will be in Newport Beach at the Orange Literary, what's it called? Hold on a second. I think it's called Orange Literary Festival. Sorry. It's in Newport Beach. Literary Orange. I'll be there. It's on April 1st. I'm not the keynote speaker. I'm a little panelist, which is great by me. So it's on April 1st at the Marriott, I think. It's literaryorange.org if you look at it. And there's a lot of really cool writers coming if you guys are in the neighborhood. And come by and see me. I'm on a panel about writing about dogs. Come by and see me and I'll say hi. Okay? I really appreciate it again for you. I'm glad you read the book. I'm glad you're writing. Thank you, Allison, for reaching out to me. All right.